In 2021, a single mother woke at 3 a.m. to find a masked man standing silently in her bedroom doorway. For a few tense seconds, he just stared before suddenly rushing at her. He jumped on top of her, launching a vicious attack. Despite her desperate attempts to fight him off, she couldn't overpower him and began screaming for help. In a gruff, Batman-like voice, the intruder snarled, "You're going to regret this!" After assaulting her, he demanded to know where she kept her valuables. He rummaged through her closet, grabbed what he could, and then ordered her to get up and walk outside. As they moved, he covered her head with a pillowcase. In the backyard, he forced her to kneel and issued a chilling warning. "Don't move until you hear 2 car honks or I'll end you." Then he left. Paralyzed with fear, the mother stayed still until a familiar voice broke the silence. It was her ex-husband. Overwhelmed with relief, she told him what had happened, and they immediately called the police. When the police arrived, they had no idea who this intruder was, but after further investigation, the police found out that it was the ex-husband himself. He set this attack up to try to win the woman's love back.
If you know these 2 people at the top, you likely know this woman in the middle. Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love were so obsessed with her that they made sure she was never forgotten. I'm Mel Z. I talk about death, true crime, and weird pop culture stuff, so if you're a weirdo too, follow me. Frances Farmer was born in Seattle in 1913 and was a huge star in the 30s and 40s. She was known as a troublemaker because she would often get into fights with executives and directors because she didn't like the way that Hollywood treated its stars and especially its women. In 1942, she was arrested for driving with her high beams on and was also suspected of being drunk. By 1943, she faced multiple charges, including assault and disorderly conduct. She was allegedly seen running down Sunset Boulevard topless after getting into a fight at a bar. She was also said to have assaulted multiple people that she worked with, including a hairdresser who pressed charges after she broke her jaw. At one court appearance, she said, quote, "I put liquor in my milk, in my coffee, and in my orange juice." She also admitted to regularly drinking Benzedrine, which is basically speed. She was actually carried out after assaulting a few cops, and as they were carrying her away, she yelled out, "Have you never had a broken heart?" In 1942, her family sold her house from under her. When she arrived home, there was a strange family living in her house and all of her stuff was gone. Soon after, they committed her to an institution. Her mother got legal guardianship of her and she stayed in this institution until 1950. Inside, she was mistreated, including SA, ice baths, shock treatments, and all the old-timey institution abuses you can imagine. When she was released in 1950, she fought to have guardianship removed from her mother and won. In the 1950s, she was mostly well. She hosted her own TV show for a while and had a few acting gigs. In 1970, she was diagnosed with esophageal cancer and died soon after. Before she died, she'd been writing her autobiography, but only got about halfway through. Her friend ended up finishing it after she died, though later she admitted that she embellished a lot of it. Frances Farmer became a kind of mirror for Kurt and Courtney. For Kurt, she represented what happens when the world thinks you're too much. He wrote Frances Farmer will have her revenge on Seattle as a sort of warning and a tribute, a way to give her the justice that she never got. For Courtney, Frances was the original difficult woman, punished for being loud, emotional, and difficult to control. At their wedding, Courtney wore a dress that had previously been owned by Frances Farmer. Contrary to what a lot of people believe, they didn't name their daughter Frances Bean after her, but they did carry her story like a prophecy, a reminder of how easily the world destroys the artists that it claims to love.
This 16-year-old girl opened fire on an elementary school because she hated Mondays. This is Brenda Spencer. Her mom pretty much abandoned her when she was really young, leaving her to be raised by her father. But Brenda's father was an abusive alcoholic. He didn't really work. They didn't have a lot of money. And allegedly, Brenda's father began to essay her when she was only 9 years old. Brenda was a really troubled kid. She got good grades in school, but she kind of like acted out in school. She was like the bad kid. She was skipping school, using substances. Brenda confided in a teacher at school about the abuse at home and that she was depressed and contemplating unaliving herself. That teacher went to Brenda's father, told him all that, and recommended therapy for Brenda, but Brenda's father said to leave them alone and that his kid was fine. Brenda did attempt to unalive herself multiple times. She would tell her father about this. She begged him to get her some kind of help for her mental health. And you know, this was the 70s, so mental health awareness wasn't really like a thing like it is today. Not trying to make excuses for Brenda's father because he is the worst. That Christmas, Brenda was 16 years old. She asked for a radio for Christmas, but instead her father bought her a weapon. He bought his 16-year-old daughter, who was depressed and attempting to unalive herself, a semi-automatic. It seemed like her father got her this as a gift because he wanted her to unalive herself. She began to, after school every single day, hunt and kill small animals, which is something that young killers do. Like, they start out with animals. And at school, Brenda started telling a bunch of people that she was planning something really big that was going to get her on TV. On January 29th, 1979, it was a Monday. It was really early in the morning. Brenda skipped school that day, and across the street from Brenda's house was an elementary school. All the elementary students were outside, lined up in the schoolyard, waiting to enter the school once the bell rang, and 16-year-old Brenda grabbed her brand new semi-automatic, and from her bedroom window from across the street from the elementary school, she began to open fire on the children. Brenda fired a total of 30 shots, which shot and injured 8 children and 1 police officer. She also took the lives of 2 of the elementary school employees that gave up their lives to protect some of the children and get them to safety. Those 2 brave school employees that gave up their lives to protect these children was the principal, Burton Ragg, and a custodian for the school named Mike Shushar. Police had to park a huge truck in front of the school's entrance to block Brenda's attack from across the street. Brenda then barricaded herself in her house for hours while her house was completely surrounded by police officers and like SWAT team. A local journalist called Brenda's house at this time while she's barricaded herself inside and asked her why she did it, and 16-year-old Brenda infamously said that she opened fire on this elementary school because she hated Mondays and it made it more fun. And after over 7 hours, a negotiator was able to convince Brenda to surrender after they promised her that they would give her Burger King. And only a month after this huge tragedy, an Irish rock band ended up putting out a song that was inspired about this tragedy called I Don't Like Mondays, and it ended up going #1 in like 32 countries. They got like a lot of backlash, but they didn't care because they got their bag. And this only further traumatized these poor children and the loved ones of the people that lost their lives even more. Brenda pled guilty to 2 counts of murder and was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, but she was never charged with the 8 attempted murder counts for the 8 children that she shot. And since that, Brenda has been denied parole like 5 or 6 times, and she's been denied mainly because she has never shown remorse until very, very recently. And to be honest, 46 years later, finally showing remorse for what you did is too little too late. During each of her parole hearings, Brenda would always have a new excuse on why she did what she did. She never actually took like responsibility. The one time she said that she was under the influence at the time, and that's why she shouldn't have been charged with murder. She should have been charged with manslaughter. But when she was arrested, they did give her a toxicology test, and the toxicology report came up that she was completely sober. Another time she said that she was hallucinating, so she didn't actually mean to hurt anyone. She also said that she wasn't actually aiming at anyone. She didn't mean to actually shoot anyone. She just wanted the SWAT team to shoot her and take her life because she wanted to unalive herself, which doesn't make sense because she fired 30 shots and shot 11 people. So that's like over 1/3 of the shots, and that's just like statistically impossible if you're not meaning to actually shoot anyone. Another time, Brenda blamed her terrible childhood and the fact that her father was SAing her. Some people don't believe that her father was SAing her. I 100% believe her, which doesn't excuse her actions at all, but I'm just saying I do believe her because Brenda's father, Wallace, when he was 41 years old, he married Brenda's cellmate when she was in juvie, and that was a 17-year-old girl, 41 and 17, and he ended up getting the 17-year-old girl pregnant. So And that's the case of Brenda Spencer. Pretty scary girl. She's still up for parole still, but I don't think she'll ever be released, if I'm just being completely honest. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments. While you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. And until then, love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys next time.
This is what Netflix didn't tell you in the Astroworld documentary. So in the documentary, they obviously do show Travis alerting the medics to a guy who looked like he was passed out in the crowd. Now, he looked absolutely awful. I would have actually presumed that he was dead or very close to death when they were getting him out of the crowd. But I feel they didn't show the most shocking clip of the Astroworld tragedy. There is a clip of Travis literally on stage as an ambulance makes its way through the crowd. Now, this was a blue light ambulance. It was very clear to see, and Travis very clearly saw it because he literally stands and goes, "What the fuck is that?" He points, pauses, and then almost milliseconds later carries on the show. Despite the fact that people are screaming, pointing, saying stop the show, saying Travis look, like pointing at the ambulance, he then just tells everybody put your hands up to the sky and then chillingly says that he's going to make the ground shake. If you've just seen an ambulance, surely your first thought is, can I make sure that everybody is okay? There was also strangely, and I mean maybe intentionally, no discussion of Kylie Jenner in any of this. This is Travis's baby mum, and she was there at the concert and she was posting clips where you could clearly see a blue light ambulance. A girl on TikTok called Priscilla actually screen recorded Kylie's full Instagram story that night and checked the next morning to see whether it was still up or whether she was going to like post an apology or condolences or something like that. And this girl said she noticed that Kylie had just deleted the one where the ambulance was clear to see, but none of the other stories. I feel like that is so interesting and very suspicious. Like, why are you just deleting the one where you could see an ambulance? I do highly recommend watching Priscilla's video on this because she posts the full receipts. Another thing that wasn't mentioned, which, okay, I guess they're not going to mention every single thing, but it was the fact that after this tragedy, Kylie still chose Astroworld as the theme for her children's birthday party. Yes, I get that's your partner at the time or the baby dad's album, like that was the whole theme, but still, after a tragedy like that, it just felt very bad taste in my opinion, and certainly not something you would want to theme your children's birthday party around. I've done a big deep dive into the Astroworld tragedy on my podcast, The Bourne Investigation.
I don't think you guys understand the sheer terror this story brings me. One person disappearing into the woods is already scary enough, but five grown men at that. But that's not even the worst part, because why were they 70 miles away from home in the middle of a winter night deep in the mountains? They had never been there before, and when one of their bodies was found months later, he'd been wrapped head to toe in 8 bed sheets. Not only that, but evidence suggests that he'd been alive out there in the wilderness for 3 months before dying, yet for some reason they weren't found. The Yuba County 5 is by far one of the most disturbing cases I've ever read about, simply because nothing can be explained. This case is still unsolved, so let's talk about it. The Yuba County 5 consists of 5 men ranging in the ages between 24 and 32 who mysteriously disappeared in the woods on February 24th, 1978. We have Bill Sterling, Jackie Hewitt, Ted Wire, Jack Madruga, and Gary Mathias. All 5 men had mild intellectual disabilities, and Gary had schizophrenia. For a little bit of a background on the men, Gary and Jack had served in the Army, and during that time, Gary started using drugs, which led to him being diagnosed with schizophrenia. After he was medically discharged from the Army, Gary went back home to Yuba County where he started treatment at a local mental facility. It was a huge struggle at first, and he ended up experiencing a few psychotic episodes, but by 1978, he was put on the right medication, and life was really looking up for him. Gary got really close with the other 4 men after this, since they all lived with their parents in Yuba City, and since they all shared a similar learning disability, they kind of bonded over this and just felt connected. All of their friends and family referred to them as the boys because of how close they were. The boys loved watching and playing basketball together, and they actually all played on a team together called the Gateway Gators. On the evening of February 24th, 1978, the boys were getting ready to play in a basketball tournament the following day, and this was something they all took very seriously and were excited about. It was a week-long tournament sponsored by the Special Olympics, so it was a really big deal. So the boys laid out their uniforms the night before and even asked their moms to come in and make sure they wake up on time because they did not want to be late to this. But after this, the boys wanted to go and watch the UC Davis basketball team play at Chico State. So Jack let everyone pile up into his car and off they went. A little side note, the only ones who had a driver's license in the group and were able to drive were Jack and Gary, but it was Jack who drove them the 50 miles to Chico State that night. After the game, the boys then went to a convenience store in downtown Chico, and there they bought some snacks, sodas, and cartons of milk to drink. This was around 10 p.m. This is the last time they would ever be seen alive, and what happened after this has never been explained. When they didn't come home that night, their parents started to worry, but when the morning came and they still weren't home, that's when they were reported missing to the police. The police didn't really take this seriously at first because they were all grown men and surely they weren't lost. They thought the boys would come home soon, but that was not the case. They did a quick little search and retraced their steps along the route that they would have taken to get home from Chico, but they found nothing. A few days later, and after seeing the boys' missing person poster, a ranger for the Plumas National Forest came forward and told police that he saw Jack's car parked in the forest. He said it was abandoned on the Orville-Quincy Road on February 25th, which is the day they were reported missing. He didn't think much of it at the time since some locals would often take that mountain road into the Sierra Nevada to go skiing. But after realizing the boys were missing and that was their car, the ranger led police to its location, and this is where things start to get strange. So the car was found 70 miles from Chico, deep into a high elevation remote forest. This was definitely not in the direction to Yuba City, so why their car was here, no one knows. None of the men were familiar with the location, especially the driver, Jack. Jack's family said he really disliked snow and the cold weather, so for them to be all the way out there in the middle of the night was really out of character. Like I said, it was abandoned. All of the doors were left unlocked, and one of the windows was rolled all the way down. This also stood out as odd to the police because it was a super cold winter night and it was snowing, so it didn't make sense why one of the windows was rolled down. Police found that they had eaten all of the snacks they bought the night they went missing, which was evident from the open wrappers in the car. Also in the car, though, was a neatly folded roadmap of California. So police found all of this, but the men were nowhere to be found. The biggest question to investigators at this point was why they decided to leave their car. They reached 4,400 feet in elevation along the mountain road, and it was right before the road was closed up ahead for the winter. It looked like the car had possibly gotten stuck in some snow drifts, and the boys had tried to spin the wheels to get out. But according to police, the snow wasn't that deep, and the 5 of them should have been able to easily push the car out and back onto the road. The other important thing missing from the scene was the car keys, which made police think that maybe their car broke down or something and that's why they left it. But investigators hotwired it, and the engine started immediately. What's even stranger is that the car still had a quarter tank of gas in it, so it's not like they ran out of fuel or something. So police had Jack's car towed back to the police station to further examine it, and the findings really only bring more questions. The undercarriage of Jack's car had no dents, gouges, or even mud scrapes on it, not even on the muffler, which hung really low on this car. This was odd considering it was driven up a really long mountain road with a lot of bumps, ruts, and potholes. Police concluded that the driver was either extremely careful or it was someone familiar with the road, which Jack was not. And Jack's family said that he was really particular about his car and would never let anyone else drive it. And furthermore, he never left it unlocked like how it was found. This made police start to question if foul play was involved. Authorities searched as best as they could, but after 2 days, they had to call it off because of the severe snowstorms in the area. No other trace of the boys were found, and it was like they vanished into thin air. For a while after their disappearance, a lot of tips came in about seeing the boys all over California, but 2 sightings really stood out. One was from a local man named Joseph. Joseph told police that he ended up unintentionally staying the night in his car near where Jack's car was found the night they went missing. He said he had a cabin in the area and wanted to check how badly it snowed before bringing the rest of his family up. But at around 5:30 p.m., he got stuck in the snow. When he got out and tried to push his car, he felt like he was having a heart attack, so he got back in his car and just waited it out. About 6 hours later, he was still in severe pain, but this is when he said he saw a car pull up a little ways behind him and park along the road. He reportedly saw a group of people around the car, including a woman holding a baby. Joseph tried calling out to them for help, but each time he did, the group of people would turn off their headlights and stop talking, like they didn't want to be seen. Joseph then said he saw a truck park about 20 feet behind him very briefly before driving off. When the morning hit, he felt good enough to walk the 8 miles down the road to a lodge where a manager drove him home. On the way out, they passed Jack's car, which was now abandoned. Although his story seemed weird at first, doctors did confirm that Joseph suffered a mild heart attack, so he wasn't lying about that. What's weird is that Ted's mom said that it would be unlike him to not help someone if they needed it. it. The second sighting was from a woman who worked at a country store in the small town of Brownsville. This is about 30 miles from where Jack's car was found, and if the boys had kept driving down the road, they would have eventually reached it. This woman said that a day after their disappearance, she saw 4 of the boys, who stopped at the store in a red truck. The store owner also saw them. She was able to identify Bill and Jackie outside in a telephone booth, while the other 2 went inside the store. The owner said Ted and Jackie then bought burritos and chocolate milk, and he said that Ted was acting really weird. He was eating basically anything that he could get his hands on. Here's what doesn't add up though. So Jackie's brother said that he absolutely hated using the telephone, so much so that he would answer the phone for Jackie anytime he got a call. And Ted's brother said that for them to just be out like this in someone else's truck the night before their big tournament, it's just really out of character. Some questioned the intent of the store employee and owner, because they reported this only after a cash reward was posted for this case. But even so, police stated that they believed this sighting. With no leads outside of this, the case kind of stalled. Then 4 months later, on June 4th, a gruesome discovery would be made. By this point, most of the snow in the mountains had melted, so a group of motorcyclists were out riding around when they stumbled across a campsite. On that campsite was a U.S. Forest Service trailer, and it looked like it had been broken into. When one of the motorcyclists opened the door to the trailer, he was hit with a horrible stench, and they quickly found out why. Laying on the bed was a decaying body, which was eventually found to be Ted. Ted was on the bed and had 8 bed sheets wrapped around him, including his head. The scene was incredibly eerie too. On the nightstand next to him was his wallet, his ring with his name engraved into it, his gold necklace, and someone's gold watch, which did not belong to him. Also on the table was a partially melted candle. An autopsy concluded that he died of a combination of hypothermia and starvation, and in total he had lost 100 pounds. What's really strange though is that when he was found, he had a beard, and the growth of this beard suggested that he'd been alive for more than 3 months after going missing. So while search parties actively looked for him, he was out there in the woods, alive. Ted's feet had severe frostbite, almost to the point of having gangrene. Missing from the scene was Ted's shoes, but investigators did find Gary's shoes, which led them to believe that Gary was also in that trailer at some point. It also would explain why Ted was wrapped up in the sheets, because investigators said that it looked like someone was trying to take care of him. Now, the biggest question here is why Ted died, and police could not figure this out. He never set a fire in the trailer's fireplace, even though it was equipped with a lot of matches and books to use as kindling. There was a ton of heavy-duty forestry clothes found in the trailer that could have kept him and the other boys warm, yet it wasn't ever touched. Ted did eat some canned food, but there was a locker in the trailer filled with enough dehydrated food to keep all 5 men alive for probably a year, yet they never even opened it. The trailer also had a pretty good heating system that you could easily turn on by flipping a valve, yet Ted never turned the heat on. So with all of these resources, the question is, why did he die? Ted's family said that he lacked common sense as a result of his disability. For example, he would question why he needed to stop at a stop sign, and one time his house caught on fire and he just laid in his bed staring at the burning ceiling. His family had to come and physically drag him out. So I'm wondering if that had something to do with him not eating the food or turning on the heat. But you'd think that if he was about to die, he might do those things. What's crazy is that this trailer was 19 miles from where Jack's car was found, which is insane to think that he walked that far in a huge snowstorm. So then a massive search around this trailer in the forest began for the rest of the boys, and soon some of them would be found too. Police really focused on the road between the trailer and where Jack's car was found, and soon they found Jack and Bill's remains down the road. This was about 11 miles from where Jack's car was found, and by now there'd been a lot of animal activity with their bones. An autopsy for them revealed that they died of hypothermia. Police believe that one of them laid down to sleep, which is common in late stages of hypothermia, and the other stayed by their side, both eventually dying in the snow. 2 days later, Jackie's dad was out searching and ended up finding his own son's backbone just 2 miles from the Forest Service trailer. His skull was found 300 feet away, and his identity was confirmed via dental records. An autopsy revealed that he too died of hypothermia. Investigators continued searching because at this point, only 4 of the 5 men were found, and in doing so, they found 3 Forest Service blankets as well as a rusted flashlight about a quarter mile from the trailer. Police don't know how long those items had been there or if they were even related to this case. Like I said, only 4 of the 5 men were found, and the only one still missing was Gary. In the trailer, police found Gary's shoes, which suggests that he too survived for some time after going missing. Police theorized that Gary's feet could have been swollen from frostbite, so maybe he took off his shoes and put Ted's on since they were bigger, hence why Ted's were never found. Investigators also found some cans of food that were opened using a P38 can opener, which points to Gary being the one to do that. Only Gary or Jack would have been familiar with that type of can opener from their military service, and And seeing as though Jack was found outside, this leaves one other person, Gary. Since Ted had been wrapped in 8 sheets, this also points to someone, aka Gary, having done this to take care of him, so to speak. Within the 3 months that they were alive but missing, Gary obviously hadn't been taking his medication for schizophrenia, so police began checking every mental hospital in the state, but not a single trace of Gary was ever found. And to this day, he remains missing, although police believe that he is likely also dead somewhere out there in the mountains, and they just haven't found him yet. It's crazy that after all of these years, police have found no evidence on the boys' bodies pointing to any conclusion about what happened that night. And although we may never know, there are a few theories. Theory number 1 is that they simply got lost and just accidentally died. Although we don't know why exactly the boys went into the mountains that night, some think that it was because Gary had friends in Forbestown, which isn't incredibly far away. Maybe they wanted to visit them on a whim that night, even though it's unlikely, and took a wrong turn near Oroville, which put them on that remote mountain road. But instead of staying put, they got out of the car and continued deeper into the mountains, instead of just going back down the road, where they would have ran into that lodge with people in it. Another theory is that after the boys got stuck in the snow, they tried to follow some snowcat tracks that were left by a U.S. Forest Service ranger just the day before. The ranger had gone up to that trailer to clear some snow off of the roof so that it wouldn't collapse, so it's thought that maybe the boys got out of the car and followed the tracks in the snow, thinking they would find shelter nearby. Then Jackie, Bill, and Jack all died of hypothermia halfway through the walk. The trailer was 19 miles from the car, but the theory is that Gary and Ted somehow made it to the trailer and saw that it was locked, and maybe they thought that it was private property. So after breaking in, maybe they were too scared to eat any of the food or steal the clothes, thinking they'd get in trouble taking things that weren't theirs. And then after Ted died, Gary wandered off for help. But it's crazy that this happened so long ago and he's just never been found. Like, where is he? Was he rescued or is he still out there? I have no idea. Theory number 3 is that foul play was involved. There were some rumors after the boys were found that they got into a fight outside of the convenience store in Chico right before they went missing. So some people think that it could be possible that they were followed or maybe even forced to go into the mountains, seeing as though none of them knew the area at all. Another rumor is that a town bully confessed in church to having killed the men. Nothing ever came of this though, so I don't think it's very reliable. I think the most disturbing thing about this case is that none of it makes sense. Why some of them died outside while Ted was alive for months inside the trailer, and most importantly, why only 4 of them were ever found. I know people always say Occam's razor. The simplest solution is most often than not right, and maybe they did just get lost and starve to death, but I just don't know in this case. It just feels very sinister. But it's now been 47 years, and whatever happened in those mountains remains a mystery.
Was Beethoven black? Was he really deaf? What do we really know about this man that we call a genius? This is the strange story of the most mythologized composer in history. I'm LZ. I talk about death, true crime, and weird pop culture stuff, so if you're a weirdo too, follow me. Ludwig van Beethoven was born in Bonn, Germany in 1770. By age 11, he was already composing. His teachers called him brilliant, but with brilliance often comes pain. Beethoven's father was an alcoholic who often would drag him from bed in the middle of the night for piano sessions where he would beat him when he made mistakes. He lied about his son's age to sell him as a prodigy, obsessed with creating another Mozart. By the time he was 22, both of his parents were dead and he had moved permanently to Vienna, Austria. By his mid-20s, he was a rising star in Vienna's music scene. His playing was explosive. He broke pianos, literally. The piano was a relatively new instrument at that time, having just been invented in the early 1700s, which is unbelievable if you think about it. Beethoven played with such force that he helped push the evolution of the instrument. But soon he began to go deaf. By his early 40s, he couldn't hear music clearly anymore, but he kept composing. He pressed his ear to the piano, he used ear trumpets, and eventually he carried notebooks for people to write in because conversations became impossible. Beethoven wasn't deaf in the way people often think. He could still faintly hear low notes and very loud noises. On top of his hearing loss, he struggled with his health for years. He knew that something was seriously wrong with him, but he couldn't get answers. When doctors couldn't tell him what was wrong with him, he begged scientists to study his body after he died. He spent his life writing and composing, but eventually took a long break due to illness. In 1824, he returned to the stage for the premiere of his most famous work, his Ninth Symphony. It was his first public appearance in over a decade. He stood on stage conducting a piece he would never fully hear. The orchestra followed a second conductor hidden beside him. At the end of the performance, Beethoven kept waving his arms, unaware that the symphony had ended. One of the soloists had to turn him around so he could see the standing ovation, which is something that is just so heartbreaking. This was his final public appearance. He died just 3 years later on March 26, 1827. In 1863, almost 40 years after he died, his wish was granted when he was exhumed and scientists studied his body. During the process, pieces of his skull were quietly taken, likely by scientists or collectors. For over a century, pieces of Beethoven's head were scattered across Europe and North America. In 1990, 2 fragments were found in California, and in 2005, they were returned to Vienna. After his death, a sculptor made a death mask of Beethoven, a plaster cast of his face taken during the autopsy. It wasn't the first, as a life mask was taken in 1812 while he was still alive. Today, different versions of these masks are on display at various museums. There's been debate over the years as to whether or not Beethoven may have had African ancestry. This is a well-established theory that has been discussed for well over a century. Leaders like Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael argued that he was black. There are many descriptions of him as being dark-skinned, and obviously we don't have photos of him. There's no irrefutable evidence that he was black, but there's no irrefutable evidence that he was white either. And whether or not Beethoven was black isn't really the point. The deeper question is, why is it easier to imagine that Beethoven was a tortured white genius than to imagine that that genius may have been black? And while we've spent centuries obsessing over Beethoven, we've erased names like Joseph Boulogne, George Bridgetower, and more modern names like Florence Price and William Grant Still. Black composers who shaped classical music but were written out of it. So when people say that Beethoven was black, maybe they're not claiming certainty, but just demanding that we widen the frame. Today, Beethoven's skull is still incomplete. His grave in Vienna still draws thousands of visitors every year. Tourists, musicians, and history lovers leave flowers and pay tribute to a man whose art reshaped the world. Beethoven created music that exploded boundaries. Music born of silence, illness, trauma, and vision. Maybe what makes Beethoven radical is that he forced us to hear things we didn't think could be heard. In the end, Beethoven's greatest triumph wasn't the Ninth Symphony. It was refusing to surrender his art to silence.
This 17-year-old girl became a killer so she could be with her 33-year-old boyfriend. This case takes us to Toledo, Ohio, right outside of Cleveland. 53-year-old Nicole Jones was living a pretty normal life, except for the fact that her adult son was living with her and he was getting himself in a bit of trouble. Nicole's 33-year-old son, Jonathan, was a veteran. He served in Afghanistan and afterwards he was diagnosed with PTSD. At the time, he wasn't working. He couldn't hold down a job at all. He had multiple children with different women, but wasn't financially supporting them because he didn't have a job. So Jonathan is living at his mom's house and he's really not doing anything. He spends a lot of time playing video games or going online, specifically on dating websites. And it was on a dating website that 33-year-old Jonathan began a relationship with a 17-year-old girl named Caitlin Coons. Now, Caitlin is a very troubled girl. Her parents were neglectful, abusive, they had substance issues. So at a very young age, Caitlin was removed from their care and put into the foster system. And she was still in foster care at 17 years old when she met and began dating 33-year-old Jonathan. Jonathan was arrested because of this relationship he was having with Caitlin because obviously it's illegal and he's a predator. Jonathan pled guilty to these charges and he was released with an ankle monitor, but he had a sentencing hearing scheduled for May 4th, 2023. But Jonathan never showed up for this hearing, so he's missing, probably on the run. But the very next day, May 5th, Jonathan's mother, Nicole, was reported missing. No one had heard or spoken to Jonathan's mother, Nicole, in weeks. They went to her home, she wasn't there, and her car was also missing. The police go to Caitlin's foster home thinking that maybe she knows where her boyfriend and her boyfriend's mom are, but they found out that 17-year-old Caitlin was missing as well, and no one had seen her in over 2 weeks. So in case any of you guys are lost, let me break this down real quick. You have this teenage girl that's missing. Her 33-year-old predator boyfriend is missing, as well as his mother. She's missing as well, and his mother's car. So as the police are trying to piece together what the hell is going on here, the police are notified that 17-year-old Caitlin had texted her caseworker that she had killed 2 people and burned down a house and was on the run. At first, the police were thinking that Caitlin was possibly kidnapped by her predator boyfriend, but now they're thinking, did she kill her boyfriend and her boyfriend's mom? A few days later, Nicole's car was seen crossing the Mexico border, and a few days after that, Caitlin and Jonathan were arrested in Mexico. They were in possession of substances and were trying to sell Nicole's jewelry on the side of the road. Originally, Jonathan and Caitlin both claimed that they had no idea that Jonathan's mom, Nicole, was even missing, and that Nicole had given them her car and all of her jewelry so they could run off to Mexico and be together. And when Caitlin was confronted with that text that she sent to her caseworker, she said that she never sent that text, and most likely her ex-boyfriend had hacked her phone and sent the text that she killed people because he worked for the dark web. After 4 hours of interrogation, Caitlin finally cracked and confessed everything. Nicole said that her 33-year-old boyfriend's mother, Nicole, did not approve of their relationship because why would she? And Nicole was trying to get Jonathan to break up with Caitlin. So in the middle of the night on April 18th, 2023, Caitlin snuck in through Jonathan's bedroom window and she gave her 33-year-old predator boyfriend an ultimatum. She said, "You have 5 hours to kill your mom or I'm going to break up with you." Caitlin then spent the next 5 hours trying to convince Jonathan to kill his mom. But after those 5 hours were up, Jonathan said, "I can't do that. I don't want to kill my mom. Like, that's my mom. I love her." So Jonathan expected Caitlin to just break up with him. But instead, Caitlin, who's only 17 years old, just gets up and says, "Fine, then I'll do it." At this point, it's morning. Nicole has no idea that Caitlin is even in her house. Nicole's in the kitchen just trying to start her day when Caitlin sneaks up behind her and strangles her. And afterwards, Caitlin showed Jonathan his mother's body, and allegedly he was so upset he began to get sick. But I guess he wasn't upset enough because afterwards he put his mother's body in the trunk of her own car, drove it to some random apartment complex dumpster, and then put his mother's body in a dumpster so it would just end up at the landfill. As for that text message that Caitlin sent to her caseworker where she said that she killed 2 people, allegedly, Caitlin confessed to being a part of a drive-by shooting when she was 15 years old, but I couldn't find too much information on that. Caitlin and Jonathan both pled no contest and were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 25 years. This all happened not too long ago. This case is pretty recent. It was from 2023, and it's 2025 now, so almost 2 entire years since Nicole Jones was murdered, and to this day, Nicole Jones's body has never been found. And if you watched to the end of this video, thank you so much. You guys are truly the best audience, which is why I'll be so devastated if I don't have you guys a week from now. So go check me out everywhere else. Go check me out on YT and everywhere else I'm gonna be. Go do that right now. Okay, I will see you guys next time. Love you, bye.
A man hired a hitman to kill his wife, but she ended up killing the hitman with her bare hands. This is the most badass Uno reverse I've ever seen in my life. It was the 6th of September 2006, and Susan Kuhnhausen had had a busy shift as an A&E nurse. She worked at the Providence Portland Medical Center, and the 51-year-old woman was incredibly hardworking and caring, so the career just suited her down to the ground. As she got back to her home that day in southeast Portland, she saw a note was left from her husband Mike. They'd been married 18 years and he left her a note saying, "Sue, haven't been sleeping, had to get away, went to the beach." couch. Now, she didn't really think too much of this and she was tired, so she made her way upstairs for a lie down. As she entered her bedroom, she was met by a terrifying attack. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a stranger that had been hiding behind her bedroom door leapt out and started trying to attack her with a hammer. Susan had no idea this man was Edward Haffey, a hitman who'd been hired by her husband.
Part 37, who the fuck did I marry?
The 59-year-old criminal had been paid $50,000 by her husband to carry out the vicious killing. But luckily, Susan was a total badass. As part of her medical training as an A&E nurse, Susan was no stranger to self-defense. She was always prepared for the unexpected, and she knew how to save herself in life and death situations. She dived at the man, totally throwing him off guard, and she described how her adrenaline was just pumping around her body. She knew this was life or death. She tackled him against the wall and wrestled the hammer off him before striking him in the head with his own weapon. Now, she screamed at him, demanding to know who had sent him, who asked you to kill me. When he refused to talk, she grabbed him round the neck and started strangling him. In sheer panic, she then decided to try and run for it and make an escape. But in a dramatic turn of events, Edward grabbed her once again and punched her in the face. Thinking quickly, she bit him on the arm in the hopes that even if she died there and then, her teeth marks would hopefully link him back to her killing. Luckily though, in the struggle, she was able to get him in a chokehold, and eventually he went lifeless and floppy. She grabbed the hammer and raced over to her neighbour's house, where she rang police. She obviously explained every single thing that had happened, and when they showed up to the house, they did in fact find Edward on the floor deceased. So how on earth did they connect this hitman to her husband? Well, Edward had been less than sly about who his clients were. Police discovered his daily planner, which, funnily enough, a couple of days before this attack, included a note to call Mike along with husband Mike's phone number. They soon worked out the two were colleagues, and to make himself even more suspicious, Mike actually went on the run at this point. But it only took a week for the police to track him down. He was actually hiding just about 10 miles away from Susan's workplace. The next day, Susan filed for divorce. It turned out in 1994, hitman Edward was convicted of arranging the murder of his ex-girlfriend and had spent about 9 years in prison for this, but clearly hadn't learnt his lesson. In August 2007, Michael pleaded guilty to soliciting a murder-for-hire plot against his wife. He was given just 10 years in prison, but infuriatingly, this was reduced due to good behaviour. In the fight for her life, Susan was left black and blue, and the mental torment was even worse. She constantly felt like she was being watched. She really couldn't relax, so she ended up moving away from the area.
He says he has a surprise for them, and then he goes and grabs a hatchet. This has to be one of the saddest cases I've ever looked into, an absolutely horrific tragedy. Technically an unsolved case, but I'm pretty sure we all know what happened, and at the center of all of it is this evil SOB. People compare him to Chris Watts, but he's like the Chris Watts before Chris Watts. Josh Powell did not have a good childhood. His dad, Steven, was really abusive, and his dad would show him like inappropriate movies when he was a little boy, and I know you know what I mean. Josh was very unwell and angry when he was a little boy, and at one point he actually tried to attack his mom with a butcher knife just because she asked him to do the dishes. Josh met Susan through the Mormon church. The two of them quickly got married. It was very fast. Then the two of them moved to Utah, where they had 2 sons, Charlie and Braden, and it really seemed like they had this beautiful, happy, perfect life and family. Susan would confide in her friends that her husband Josh was very controlling and abusive. He was very threatening any single time she said that she wanted to leave him. They were also in a terrible financial situation, mainly because Josh was racking up a lot of debt, and then he had to file for bankruptcy. Susan records this really chilling video, like she knew something bad was gonna happen, where she walks around her house kind of showing off all of their belongings.
This is me, July 29th, 2008. It is 12:33 Mountain Time. Covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me or my family or all of us, that our assets are documented. Hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after as much as that's possible.
Very sad to watch that tape, knowing what ultimately ends up happening to her. Because on December 7th, 2009, Susan disappeared. That day, she never showed up to take her 2 sons to daycare, and since that was so odd, the daycare actually called their emergency contact, which was Josh's sister, to go see if everything was okay. When Josh's sister got to the house, she was knocking on the door, calling them, but no one was answering, so she called the police. Everyone had this gut feeling like something terrible was wrong, so they actually knocked down the door, and inside, no one was home. The entire family was missing, but Susan's phone, her purse, all her belongings were still in the house. And then probably the most chilling of it all, 2 large fans were pointed at the carpet and trying to dry this part of the carpet, which looked like it was recently washed. Like it was trying to dry the carpet really, really fast, which was so suspicious. And then Josh and his 2 sons just showed up, and Josh tried to claim that he had no idea that his wife was missing. Josh claimed that the night before, around midnight, he took his 4-year-old and 2-year-old son on a spontaneous camping trip, and his wife did not join them. So he's really claiming that he went on a spontaneous camping trip in the middle of the night. It was after midnight with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old in December when it was freezing cold temperatures and it's like pitch black in the Utah wilderness at night. It's freezing during the summer, but you're doing this in December, and that just so happened to be the day that your wife disappeared. There was no clue where Susan was and no evidence that linked Josh to her disappearance, but people were definitely suspicious of him, and even more suspicious, after his wife Susan was only missing for 1 month, Josh just packed up with his sons and moved all the way to Washington to go live with his dad, Steven. This is so bizarre. Your wife has been missing for only a couple weeks and you're moving states with her children. Don't you think you'd want to be there in case your wife comes home or maybe help in the search to find her? Josh Powell was already guilty in the court of public opinion, and then him and his father Steven started to say some really disgusting things about Susan in the media, just absolutely running her name through the dirt. Josh's dad, Steven, even tried to claim that Susan would come on to him, which absolutely was not true because Susan would tell everyone that she actually got the creeps from her husband's father, and for good reason. Susan's 2 sons, who were only 4 and 2 years old when she disappeared, started to say some really disturbing things. Charlie would just blatantly say that his mother was dead, and then Braden drew a family photo which had him, his brother, and his dad in their family minivan, and when someone asked him where his mom was, he said that mommy was in the trunk. The police actually did a search on the home that Josh was living in with his sons and his dad, and the police found some really, really disturbing things. Very, very, very creepy. Josh's dad had over 4,000 photos of Susan that were taken without her realizing. The police also confiscated 3 computers, and I don't even want to know what they found on them, but afterwards, Josh's dad, Steven, was arrested for having bad photos of children, as well as for watching someone without their permission. He served 7 years in prison for this, was released in 2017, and then passed away in 2018. But afterwards, Charlie and Braden were removed from Josh's custody and put in the custody of Susan's parents. Josh was offered supervised visitation if he agreed to move out of his father's home, which ended up being a terrible, tragic mistake. Josh did end up making that move. He moved out of his dad's house, got his own place, but Josh was not happy with supervised visitation. He wanted full custody of his kids, but Josh was denied full custody after a court hearing where they found that Josh was drawing some disturbing cartoons. Don't even want to know what those were. It was recommended that Josh get an evaluation, but in the meantime, he was still allowed to have supervised visits of his 2 sons with a caseworker present. But after that court hearing, Josh started to plan something terrible. He bought a bunch of gasoline, he donated all of his son's toys to a thrift store, and then he sent goodbye and apology emails to all of his family members. On February 5th, 2012, Josh had a scheduled visit with his 2 sons, but reportedly, Charlie and Braden did not want to go to their dad's house that day, but they had to. A caseworker named Elizabeth picked the 2 boys up from Susan's parents' house and drove them to their father's house. And when they got there, the 2 boys just hopped out of the car and they ran up to their dad. But before the caseworker could catch up to them, Josh slammed the door in her face and locked it. Caseworker Elizabeth starts freaking out. She says that she never had anything like this happen to her ever. She's knocking on the door, she's begging Josh to open it, and then she hears Josh say, Charlie, I have a big surprise for you. And then afterwards, she said she could hear the boys crying and screaming. And we now know that's because their father, Josh, was attacking them with a hatchet. Caseworker Elizabeth then starts to smell an overwhelming smell of gasoline, so she goes and she calls 911. And I have to say, the 911 operator on this call makes me so mad. He sounds like such a jerk. He sounds annoyed that Elizabeth is even calling. Elizabeth is telling the 911 operator that she's really scared for these two young boys' lives, and she's asking, when are the police gonna get here? And the 911 operator, in like a really gross tone, tells her that he doesn't know, and they're gonna respond to emergency and life-threatening situations first. This is someone that doesn't have custody of children, and they've locked themselves away with these children. The children are crying and screaming. You don't know why, and now you smell gasoline and you don't think that's an emergency. But tragically, it would just be too late, because then Josh's house exploded. It burst into flames and there were no survivors. Josh passed away, but so did 7-year-old Charlie and 5-year-old Braden. Hatred I feel for Josh is unbelievable. I don't think I've actually hated anyone so badly. He's such a coward. Like, what a pathetic excuse for a man. Like, if you want to go out like that and you want to do that, fine, whatever. I don't care. You probably killed your wife. But to take the boys' lives that way too, it makes me actually so sick. Every single time I hear about this case, I start to cry. Every single time. And to this day, Susan Powell has never been found, but it is believed strongly that her husband Josh took her life as well. And if you watched the end of this, thank you so much for listening to Susan, Braden, and Charlie's stories. It means the world to me that you guys have been here at all. Love you guys so much. I hope I'm here with you guys tomorrow. But if I'm not, I hope you guys have been looking at this, because this has been on the screen the whole time, and go find me there.
Imagine browsing around a shopping centre, then seeing a woman being murdered in broad daylight. It was the 13th of September 2005 in Knightsbridge in London. 22-year-old Claire Bernal was living in the area after landing a great job working at Harvey Nichols. She worked as a beauty consultant and had a small flat where she lived with some colleagues, and she loved the setup that they had. Claire had grown up in Tunbridge Wells. She was stunning and had a real eye for anything makeup and beauty. Shortly after starting work there, she actually caught the eye of one of the security guards who also worked in the building. This was 30-year-old ex-soldier Michael Pesh. Now, he built up the courage to ask Claire out and was overjoyed when she agreed. She said, "Yeah, I'll let you take me on a date." But Michael was very overbearing. Claire was young and beautiful. She literally had just agreed to start dating this guy. She didn't sign up to marry him. He was not happy about this at all, and after only going on a couple of dates with her, claimed to be in love with her. This was obviously a huge red flag, and Claire confided in her mum that she really didn't like how he was pressuring her. This was going way too fast for her liking. He was very intense. But it was obviously pretty awkward because the pair did work together, so she really struggled to get any space from him. Claire was quite relieved when he ended up taking a little break from work to fly back to Slovakia, his home country, to see his family. But she really couldn't get away from him that easily. Immediately upon his return, he demanded that she collected him from the airport. She agreed to keep the peace, but when she collected him, he then demanded staying over at her house for the night. Again, feeling really uncomfortable with where this was going, she obliged. She thought the ordeal would be over in the morning when he would leave. But again, the following day, he refused to leave her house, and the pair ended up having a really big argument, and she just called this whole thing off. She said she didn't want to see him anymore. He was super full on, and the relationship was just going way too fast. But Michael was relentless. He would repeatedly call her, text her constantly, even turn up to her flat and refuse to leave. And all of her flatmates would see this crazy behavior, and he just didn't care. His texts went from pestering to threatening. He would threaten to unalive himself if she didn't give him another chance, and he also subtly started threatening her. Then on the 30th of March, he got onto the same train that she boarded at London Bridge. She actually, at this point, threatened to report him, to which he responded by getting right up in her face and saying that if she reported him, he would kill her. And the pair, like I said, even worked together so she physically couldn't get away from this man. He sometimes even followed her home from work, which was absolutely terrifying. Now, thankfully, Michael's manager ended up suspending him from work for his behaviour, but unfortunately, this kind of seemed to make matters worse. As he got his things to leave, he chillingly made a comment to a colleague. He said, how long would he go to prison for murder in the UK? Now, Claire was informed of this and, terrified, reported it to the police. And this, you would think, should have been the end of it. Michael was sacked and he was arrested. Now, police reassured Claire that Michael's bail conditions meant he wasn't allowed anywhere near her, but do you think Michael was going to listen? She finally felt she could get back to normal. But on the 13th of September, all hell would break loose. At 7:45 p.m, staff were preparing to close the store. A few customers continued browsing and Claire stood at the cosmetics counter, totally unaware of what was about to happen. Suddenly, Michael appeared out of nowhere. He was holding a gun. He snuck up behind Claire before casually firing the weapon into the back of her head. In an instant, she fell to the floor and Michael callously shot her again 3 times in the face. He then calmly turned the weapon on himself. Both Michael and Claire were pronounced dead at the scene. Horrifically, Claire's mum had a knock on the door at 2:45 a.m. to tell her the horrific news. Claire's family have tirelessly campaigned for better protection for women against stalking.
Every once in a while, you'll hear of a story that is not only incredibly disturbing, but at the same time will make you lose sleep and rack your brain over what really happened. That's this one for me, because picture this. She was found dead in her own basement, covered in blood. There was evidence of a violent struggle, such as a broken piggy bank embedded in her forehead. Police assume that she just fell down the stairs and died, but at some point after her fall, she stood up and left bloody footprints at the base of the stairs. Except for some reason, she never climbed back up for help. The broken piggy bank was found sitting perfectly on a shelf at the top of the stairs, and this is just the beginning. Police say no foul play was involved, but I am not totally buying it. This is one of those cases that fill me with dread because no one knows what she experienced in her final moments, but I cannot stop thinking about it. So let's talk about the mysterious death of Amanda and Tony. Amanda was 31 years old when she suddenly and very mysteriously died on October 24th, 2015. She and her husband Lee lived in a nice little house in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, in the Castle Ridge neighborhood. Living with them was their rescue dog Ruby and their 2 cats, who they loved so much. Amanda and Lee married in 2009 and were pretty much inseparable ever since. They rarely ever spent time apart, but the rare exception was that fateful weekend. The weekend of October 23rd, 2015 marked the anniversary of Lee's dad's death, so he and Amanda had planned to drive up to his mom's house in Saskatchewan so that she wasn't alone. But on that Friday, when they were due to leave, Amanda changed her mind last minute and decided to stay home instead. She was known to suffer from really bad migraines, and she had one that day, so she didn't want to drive the 8 hours to her mother-in-law's house. So off Lee went by himself, and little did he know that when he came back home, his life would never be the same. After leaving, Lee and Amanda spent Friday night and most of Saturday texting back and forth like normal. At around 7 p.m. on Saturday, Lee called her, and this is when she told him that her migraine had pretty much gone away and she was feeling much better, which was great to hear. But not long into the call, Lee heard their dog start barking and yelping, in which Amanda tried to calm her down. Then Lee heard a loud crunching sound before the phone abruptly cut out. He tried to call her back a few times, but each time it went straight to voicemail. He also tried texting her a handful of times, but after this, he never got a response back. Even though the couple were really close, Lee didn't seem too concerned about this at first and just figured Amanda was either busy or maybe her phone stopped working. But when Sunday evening came and went and he still hadn't heard from her, he decided to cut the trip a little bit short and head home first thing Monday morning, and no one could have expected what he was about to find. When he got home that Monday afternoon, which was now October 26, 2015, he walked into a chaotic scene. The dog and cats were running about with no food or water, and there was poop and pee all over the place. He let the dog out and started looking for Amanda, but at first he couldn't find her. Nothing seemed out of place except for an overturned dining room chair, but then he made his way to the basement, the only part of the house that he hadn't looked yet. When he turned on the lights, he immediately saw a gruesome scene. At the bottom of the stairs, the concrete basement floor was covered in blood, and when he made his way down there, he found Amanda laying on the basement floor, also covered in blood. Lee then called 911 and told them that Amanda was cold to the touch. When Calgary police arrived, they found a violent scene. They noticed a significant amount of blood, and the scene was described as gruesome, and by far the bloodiest they had ever walked into. Upon looking at her, investigators' first impression was that it appeared she'd been struck in the head by something that caused a major injury to the right side of her face, so they thought for sure this was a homicide case and treated it as such. Authorities then noticed a broken piggy bank sitting perfectly on a shelf at the top of the stairs, and when they took a closer look at Amanda's body, they then found pieces of it embedded into her forehead, and little pieces of it surrounding her body. Like I said, this was a really gruesome scene, but this is where things start to get strange. So Amanda was laying in a pool of her own blood, but what's odd is that investigators found weird swipes and patterns in the blood, and then additional drops of blood were found on top of the blood that had already been smeared across the floor, meaning this either came from Amanda after some of it had already started to dry, or it came from someone else. But the most disturbing thing is that authorities found evidence that Amanda stood up at some point after her fall. Her own bloody footprints were found pointing forward at the base of the stairs, yet she didn't climb them for help. She was alive at this point, so why she didn't do this? No one knows. A lot of the blood evidence found in the basement suggests that she spent a lot of time there moving around before she died, which is extremely disturbing and confusing. There were a set of mirrors on a wall in the basement, and this is where the majority of the blood pooled under them. This area also contained bits of the broken piggy bank. Investigators came up with two reasons as to why that could be. One being that after she was injured, either accidentally or if someone attacked her, she went to the mirrors to examine her injuries. Another reason could be that with the light hitting the mirrors, maybe she thought that that was the way up the stairs and was confused and disoriented. Investigators also found a bloody handprint on the wall at the bottom of the staircase, and it was possible that she was trying to hold herself up there. There were lots of little blood spatters on the wall, and authorities believe this was likely from her shaking her bloodied hair to get it out of her face after her injury. But most damning of all is that authorities found bloody drag marks, indicating that her body had been moved from one spot in the basement to another, where she was eventually found. After examining her body and the whole scene in the basement, it seemed clear that Amanda was murdered, but then her autopsy came back, which really only raised more questions. It was concluded that blunt force trauma caused Amanda to bleed to death, and she was covered in bruises and had a broken right orbital bone. A toxicology also showed WEED in her system, but this also confirmed that only her DNA was found at the scene, no one else's. So this led police to comb through her phone records, which showed that the last time anyone heard from her was when her husband called her at 7 p.m. on Saturday. They then determined that her time of death was around this time. But what's odd is that a neighbor came forward and said that on the night Amanda died, around the same time that she was on the phone with Lee, she heard a loud bang coming from the house, and then someone yelling. Another neighbor said that around the same time, they saw someone running away from the area through someone's backyard. This wasn't the safest neighborhood, but police found no sign of forced entry, and only her DNA was found at the scene. If there was an intruder, they would have had to enter the house either using a key or go through the back door, which Lee couldn't remember if it was locked or not when he got home. So then authorities started wondering if this was maybe just a tragic accident rather than a homicide. Like I said, they found no evidence of a break-in, nothing was missing, and the only thing that seemed out of the ordinary was the broken piggy bank and the overturned dining room chair. It was thought that maybe due to smoking WEED, Amanda was paranoid and could have knocked over the chair, and maybe just accidentally fell down the stairs. Maybe after falling, she suffered a concussion. People with a concussion often do little actions to try and soothe themselves, subconsciously. It was possible that the swoosh and smear marks in the blood came from Amanda herself, maybe moving her head side to side to try and soothe herself. One thing that investigators couldn't really explain, though, was the fact that her dog and both of her cats had not come down to the basement once after she fell. There were no paw prints in the blood, and it seemed unusual that for 48 hours they never once went downstairs to check on their owner, who they loved. Police assumed that since the floor was concrete, it was incredibly slippery, coated in blood, and because Amanda was barefoot, they thought she likely just kept slipping on her own blood and repeatedly hitting her head on the ground. But after 14 months of investigating, Calgary police ruled Amanda's death as accidental, stating that she just accidentally fell down the stairs and died, that no foul play was involved, despite the gruesome scene and the handful of unanswered questions, like how the piggy bank had been broken and pieces of it embedded into her forehead, yet somehow it wasn't knocked off the shelf at the top of the stairs, or how Amanda was alive for some time in the basement after her injuries, moving around, and even stood and faced the stairs, yet she never tried climbing them for help. Her phone was found to be thrown across the room, broken, which is another odd factor to this case. So although we don't know what exactly happened to Amanda, there are a few theories. Theory number one is that she did just accidentally fall. Maybe she was disoriented from her migraine that day and distracted on the phone with Lee and fell. Or maybe she tripped and fell over her dog since she was barking and Amanda was trying to get her to be quiet. It could be possible that she fell on the piggy bank and tripped down the stairs. Then she lost a lot of blood and succumbed to her injuries. It is weird though that the piggy bank wasn't knocked off the shelf. Theory number two was that Lee was involved. They did have a really loving relationship, but he was known to have a little temper. This was quickly ruled out though because he was in a different province with his mom at the time of her death, and this was confirmed. And he also fully cooperated with authorities. And theory number three is that Amanda was killed by an intruder. Like I said, this wasn't the safest neighborhood, and they did have reports of people breaking into their backyard in the past, but police found no evidence of this. But the smears in the blood on the basement floor could have been from an intruder trying to wipe away their footprints. It was also reported that a bloody towel was found in the basement, but whether or not that was from Amanda in an attempt to clean herself up or from someone else, no one knows. To me, it seems like a confrontation could have happened, especially with her injuries. Even the investigator said that this didn't seem like a normal scene or a regular fall down the stairs with how gruesome it was. It seems incredibly unlikely to have a fatal fall like this in your own home. And although it's rare, I guess it can happen. But the question is, did it? This case fills me with dread in ways I cannot even describe. I just don't get how something like this can happen, leaving behind so many unanswered questions. But it's now been 10 years, and whatever happened to Amanda in her basement that night remains a mystery.